Greetings! Today we'll be taking a look at a very important part of my game development journey. I recently participated in 8 game jams and have learned a lot from them. Let's see what I did right, what my mistakes were, and what other amateur and aspiring game devs can learn from them. In case you don't know what game jams are, they are essentially an event that takes place over the course of a very flexible time period, sometimes just a few days, sometimes months, and the goal of a game jam is to make a game in that span of time, while following an also very flexible set of rules. The game jam that I joined 8 times in a row is called the Weekly Game Jam. Unlike a lot of other jams, this one takes place every week, as you could tell by the name, and not just once. The rules are simple. Make a game in 6 days and use the current week's theme as an inspiration. The reason I like this jam so much is because I am not restricted on what type of games I can create, and because in case I can't finish my game, I will get a chance to finish one next week. That's enough explaining. Let's talk about the games I started creating and the games I actually finished. First, I will briefly talk about my first 5 games that I didn't finish for a few select reasons. And yes, you heard me correctly, 5. Then, I will talk about the remaining 3 games, 2 of which I did in fact finish. But I'm only proud of one of them, for reasons you will soon learn about. By the way, quick disclaimer. The games discussed in this video are not the first games I have ever made. Prior to making these, I had about 1 to 2 years worth of programming experience and a few months of experience working with the Unreal Engine. Just wanted to let my viewers know, so I don't receive any undeserved praise, you know. Anyway, without further ado, let's finally start talking about all of my games. The first game I developed for the Weekly Game Jam was called Gamble Alley. The problem I had while developing this game was that I didn't know at all how the gambling would work, which made it pretty much impossible to prototype some kind of gameplay. I did create some sounds using BFXR, a basic program that is best used for creating 8-bit sounds, a texture using Adobe Illustrator, and a 3D model of a gambling machine using Blender. So I at least learned how to use a few different programs. At this point, let me quickly explain what a game design document is. It is basically a document outlining the design of your game. Well, obviously. It contains information about all of your game mechanics, so essentially what your game is. How you write your game design document is up to you, however, it should be as precise as possible so the developer clearly knows what their game even is, something I slowly learned to do over the course of several projects. Over the course of a few game jam projects, I developed a structure for my GDDs, that's what I call them from now on, and refined it with every project I started. By now, I've reached what I think is a good template that will aid me in the creation of future projects. But I have yet to test if it is applicable to larger scale projects. One thing is for sure though, thanks to these GDDs, I know what these games were supposed to be, even a few months later, and despite the fact that I don't even have working prototypes for 3 of these games anymore. But let's get back to my games. My second game was called Skriddle. The game's name came to be by combining the words script and riddle. Clever, I know. It revolved around language, I think. But again, I didn't really know what the gameplay was supposed to be. It was the first game, however, that I wrote a GDD for. At this point, it was very basic with just a few points that highlighted that I didn't know exactly what the game was supposed to be. I downloaded a few sounds and fonts from the internet and made some images and 6 models before giving up. These can still be shown in action because unlike many of my other unfinished projects, this one has a working prototype. My third game was called Briskly Breeding. The general idea was that you bred and controlled a group of blob-like creatures. You would explore different areas of the world, fight different types of enemies, collect resources and all of that cool stuff. This time, however, I only managed to write a GDD for it and never even made any other assets like sounds, textures or even wrote code. The GDD improved a lot over the previous one from Skriddle. It's now a page long and more detailed and stylized, so not all effort was lost. My fourth game was called Find, which is German for enemy. It was a platformer set in a dark underground cave. I think. You had to use your lantern to light the way and shine its light at enemies to defeat them. Again, I scoped way too big and didn't know exactly what the game was going to be, but at least some mechanics were defined in my GDD, which was further improved by the making of this game, in the sense that this document was more stylized. My fifth game was called Path of Pleasure, which sounds a bit sexual now that I think about it. It was the closest game to being finished. I had the idea of an infinite runner type game with enemies, obstacles and break rooms in between fights, but scope too large again, not to mention that this project only marginally improved my GDD. Now that you've heard me talk a lot about game design documents and how exceptional I am at finishing projects I have started, let's talk about some projects that I actually finished, shall we? This is my first finished game, called Tower of Almost Everything. My idea for this game was that you ascend a tower with 100 floors and collect attachments for your gun, buffs for your main character, and keys to open doors with randomized surprises behind them. However, the key idea was cut pretty early in development because of time constraints. For this project, I wrote my longest GDD so far, which is over 1.5 pages long, so at this point it was becoming quite detailed, as you can see. And now it's time I introduce you to another tool I used frequently during game development, Hack and Plan. It allows me to organize my tasks in 4 columns: planned, in progress, testing, and completed. This helps me to keep track of what I still have to do, and Hack and Plan is designed specifically for game development with the inclusion of a game design document structure. This makes my life a bit easier, and it also allows me to show you which task I finished and what was cut from the final project. Another neat feature is that an ID is assigned to every card I create, so you can see how many tasks were deleted. As you can see, the tasks that got finished skip quite a few numbers, so development was definitely a bit chaotic. I worked on this project every day for many hours, especially during the final 3 days, and didn't feel very well both mentally and physically when I finally shipped my game. I had never spent so many hours working on my laptop. I usually don't even play games that long, so this is what crunch time must feel like. Luckily, I only worked this intensely for a few days, but the memories I have of these days are not very pleasant ones. There are some other points I'd like to discuss before moving on to the final project that I cancelled, so maybe you can learn something from them. Firstly, I focused on sounds and music way too late because I was very busy getting the coding done. During my last day of development, I quickly added some sounds I found through a simple DuckDuckGo search and called it a day. The way I tested the gameplay was to put my character and some enemies in a simple box-like arena. In this arena, the gameplay was fun. However, the gameplay didn't translate too well to my final levels, that were corridors, a labyrinth, and some other more complex shaped areas. I only realized that when it was too late. Should have tested the gameplay in these areas a little more. Oh well. Last, but not least, at the end of development, I deleted my test level because I thought I didn't need it anymore. That made testing last way longer when I discovered that in my already packaged project, the buff and attachment switching mechanic didn't work, and so I had to resort to a cheap fix last minute. That was because the game's final code made it very difficult to test something in the actual gameplay level. It's kinda difficult to explain exactly why that was to an audience of people who aren't programmers, so you will just have to take my word for it. Now we will move on to my 6th and last failed game. It was called Stormstruction. Just when I thought I had learned to keep my game jam project simple, I yet again scoped too large. The idea was that you'd build base defenses at day in a wide open desert, hide in a bunker at night and hope the structures you built would fight off a lethal storm that was coming for you. This time, however, I realized at the end of the first day that the project's scope was too large again, so I could still make some changes and drastically reduce the scope of the project. At this point, I had already gotten pretty good at writing game design documents, so I could more easily make changes to the game's design without completely breaking it. One thing that I scrapped was a cool day and night cycle. It looked really good, even though I had just invested a couple of hours into programming it. But unfortunately, part of game design is getting rid of the ideas you love the most, if they just don't work well, or if you're under a strict time limit. I did keep the desert and bunker idea, as well as the concept of a deadly storm and structures, but heavily simplified all of these gameplay elements. At one point, I even changed the concept to having a maximum of 3 structures and 3 storm clouds with a tic-tac-toe-like gameplay 3 days before the deadline, but scrapped the idea just minutes after coming up with it. In the end, I gave up 2 days before the deadline. I had wasted 4 out of the 6 days that I had, and I hadn't even created any fun gameplay. So I just threw in the towel and told myself that next time I would do a better job, which ended up becoming true. One incredibly important thing I'd like to mention before I cover my final and best game is that the desert environment that I ended up making had cool looking sand. The sand was created using Unreal's landscape tools, and its surface material used so-called normal maps, which are an effective way of faking surface depth. I generated these using a free web tool, so this was my first time actually using normal maps. I also learned about custom trace channels, they have something to do with collision, and the launch URL node, which can open a browser and a specific website, so not all effort had gone to waste. You don't have to understand what I just said there, just know that I still learned something from this project. Understood? Let's move on. And this is my second finished game, and it's also my best. It's called Incommunicado, or Incommunicado, I'm not really sure. This time, my idea was that you platform through an obstacle course set in an arena using just a few moves. While you traverse the arena, you also have to avoid detection from a giant turret in the center of the arena. Sounds simple, right? Well, it still took me 5 days to make that game, even though I kept the art and sound simple from the beginning, so I could focus on the gameplay mechanics. I also made sure that this time I clearly defined them in my GDD, which I did successfully. So I am very happy with the GDD I made for this project. This one even contained a short description of my game, how I would describe it to consumers. I got this idea from an article about how to write a game design document. By the way, this was, and still is, the only article I've ever read about GDDs. So most of the ideas for my own documents came from me. Anyway, let's get back to the point. Because I could focus on just a few mechanics, I could make them fun in just a few days, and the gameplay overall ended up being quite a bit of fun in my opinion. And that's something I usually don't say about the games I've made so far. I didn't bother to make a checkpoint or save system, because that would have added a lot of extra work. Though this may be frustrating if you die a lot, but I don't think it harms the gameplay too much. The entire gameplay area didn't receive the same amount of polish as the gameplay mechanics though. It was created using simple block meshes in just 1 day. I worked on a section of the obstacle course before moving on to the next one. A new section begins when you get a new power-up. The sections get progressively harder and utilize all the moves you have at this point, not just the most recently acquired one. I had this idea of sections from the beginning, but only got around to implementing them at the end of the project. Still, I think the entire obstacle course turned out fine for the most part. Only a few ideas were scrapped this time around. This can be seen by the list of completed tasks on my Hack and Plan board. Only a few numbers are missing, compared to my Hack and Plan board of Tower of Almost Everything. The project was eventually released 1 day before the deadline, and this time around, I didn't have to suffer through extremely long hours, so the development was way more fun than my development of Tower of Almost Everything. And that's where I'm at right now. So what is the moral of the story? Start making simple games. That's one piece of advice that a lot of game developers will probably give you when it comes to creating your first game. I would also recommend to keep a few subsequent games as simple as possible before you try to create the next Elder Scrolls or GTA game all on your own. I hope this video has also shown you that even the simplest of games take time to make, so maybe you will appreciate the amount of work that has gotten into your favorite games more from now on. Or maybe not. I kinda don't wanna end this video by shamelessly advertising all of my social media accounts, so I instead wish you a pleasant day, or night, and will now say goodbye. Goodbye.